The chances that you will be prosecuted for practicing polygamy in Utah are slim, unless you're committing some other crime too. As it stands right now, polygamy in Utah has been decriminalized. But here's the problem. Institutionalized or institutional polygamy, as practiced by many groups here, is a pretty closed system that's difficult to leave, especially for the women and the children of polygamy. You might want out of polygamy, but no one's going to say, sure, go ahead, you can leave. And if you find your way out of the clutches of these powerful polygamist cults, shall we call them, you'll find yourself in a world for which you may have no reference and little understanding. If you've lived your life in polygamy, the world you're in when you leave is pretty bewildering, I would think. And we'll find out about that. This is episode 11 of What Do You Think, Utah? Tonight we'll talk with three women who each found their way out of the world of polygamy. They are, to my immediate right, Kristyn Decker, author of 50 Years in Polygamy, Big Secrets and Little White Lies. She's also the founder of the Sound Choices Coalition. Thank you for being with us. Also with us next is Kristyn Marie. She's founder of Voices for Dignity to help bring happiness to the lives and survivors of abuse and oppression. And I think when we say abuse and oppression, you can get an idea of what Kristyn Marie thinks of polygamy. And then on the end of the couch over there, we have Brenda Nicholson, who is a blogger, a public speaker, a mother, and a filmmaker. And she also has her own story of escaping from polygamy. Thanks all for being here. Now, I'm going to give you a really brief, and I mean brief, history of polygamy. A friend of ours, Lindsay Hansen Park, sent me a timeline of the history of polygamy. I said, Lindsay, can you just give me a brief rundown? And she sent me an exhaustive history of polygamy. I distilled it into about 30 seconds. Here's my brief history of Mormon polygamy. There are other religions that practice polygamy, and there are other forms of polygamy. There's non-religious polygamy as well. This is a history of Mormon polygamy as told by me, Bill Allred. Feel free to correct me, or feel free to adopt it for your own use. In 1827, Joseph Smith, the founder of the LDS Church, married Emma Hale. She became Emma Hale Smith. In 1830, Joseph Smith founded the LDS Church, and in 1830, the first Book of Mormon was printed. In 1832, just 2 years later, Joseph Smith said, kind of quietly, let's have polygamy. But it was kept really on the down low until the LDS faithful came to the Utah Territory. Now, what I mean by kept on the down low, Joseph said, let's have polygamy, but he didn't tell all the members of the LDS Church about that. He told a couple of friends and close advisors, people he thought he could trust. I've got this great idea. I mean, God has told me that we should have polygamy, and it's really cool, so let's have polygamy. 1852, the LDS faithful had come to Utah, the Utah Territory, and they started practicing polygamy pretty openly. As a matter of fact, Brigham Young, the leader of the LDS Church and the territorial governor, had 55 wives, and they were all pretty open about it by this time. In 1870, the feds started cracking down on Utah, saying, well, you know, you guys are, this is pretty weird, and we don't like it. We don't like it that you're practicing polygamy. You're bigamous, and you're weird, and we don't care for it. In 1896, Utah became a state, and in part because the LDS Church officially renounced polygamy. And that's when it all went underground. And there's a lot of other stuff in there that's strange and interesting, but that's a really brief Bill Allred history of polygamy. 1896, officially it went away, and that's when all of these groups splintered and went off. Groups went to Mexico, groups went to Canada, and that's when polygamy became a splinter group. Is that pretty fair?
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty fair, brief history of polygamy.
Good job.
All right. Now, I would like each one of you women, if you would please, to give us a brief history of your life in polygamy. Tell us how you got into it, what life was like when you were there, why you decided to leave. And I may interrupt you briefly with a question or two, but we'll start with Kristyn Decker. When, why, how did you get into polygamy, and what polygamous sect were you a part of?
I was born into polygamy as a seventh generation polygamist. So my father, or my sixth great grandfather, baptized my seventh great grandfather into the LDS church. Both of them knew Joseph Smith, knew his wives. And all the way down, we were told, you have to live polygamy or you will be damned and destroyed. And I grew up with that. My mother was the first of my father's 13 wives. My father had only 23 children. He was the he was the prophet of the AUB group, the Apostolic United Brethren.
Your father's name was?
My father was Owen Allred. He passed away, but Owen Allred. He had many more wives that were sealed to him for the afterlife. And I find out I've got sisters and brothers everywhere that I'll have, eventually if I get there. But I'm sure I won't. That's my,
so where was
about that belief.
Where was the AUB? Where did they locate themselves?
I was born
mostly?
and raised right in Murray, where the Fashion Place Mall is. There used to be a little tiny greenhouse there, and for blocks and all over there was called Plagueyville. And I went to Hillcrest Junior High School and Murray High School, or Junior High, and then Murray High School. I lived polygamy with my husband. I raised my children, 7 of them, to live plural marriage because I believed we had to do that. In fact, I believed so much so because I wanted my children. I mean, I didn't want to ever live polygamy, but you have to do it in order to be saved, in order to have your children with you. So I thought, okay, I might as well. Also, going back a little bit, I watched my mother, who was the first of my father's 13 wives, struggle in depression most of her whole life. She would cry in private and come out with a big smile on her face and say, it's just me. It's not the principal. It's not the principal that's bad. It's just me. I'm the bad person. I'm the wicked person. And I'm getting over it. And the more we sacrifice and the more we endure, the more we're going to get to heaven. And I watched her go through that all of my whole life and continued to support my father in getting more and more wives and more distant, less time for her. Less of everything, and it was really tough, but she got ingrained that into me, and so I did the same thing.
You got married, and
I
then
lived plural marriage with
your
my
husband took other wives?
He had one other wife, and we were consistently looking for the other wife because the belief system is that you have to have 3 wives, at least 3, to just get your big toe into heaven. And you need to have 5 more, to get comfortably into heaven. 7, you got it made.
Really,
I'm serious.
There was really a quota.
Oh yeah, there's a quota. Yeah, that's in the belief system of the way I was raised anyway, the fundamental LDS. So
let me ask you this: so you're living and you lived in Murray still with your husband and your sister wives?
I was raised in Murray, but we moved out of Murray when I married.
To
different locations in the valley and moved around several times.
And did people know you were a polygamist?
Yes, that was crazy, and you can't help it. What was really funny is even though he had one other wife besides me, we were known as having a whole bunch of wives because I had family and sisters and friends that would come by and, oh, there's all the wives, look, there's all the wives. But in all honesty, the toughest part for me was the sadness all around me. I was sad. I was always depressed and jealous, and yet I did just what my mom did. I put that smile on my face and said, I'm going to be happy, and this is what I believe I'm going to do, and so therefore it's my choice. So I thought that was what choice was.
Did you
Yeah.
live well? Did your husband?
Yeah, we
you-
had lots of food out of the garbage cans and off of food stamps and welfare, and because we couldn't provide for only 11 children that we had, let alone the larger families. And I say that facetiously, but it was part of our life. It seemed like it was feast or famine, and it was really a struggle.
And
It was very
did the
much a
law
struggle.
ever bother you?
No, but we were afraid of that. And the older I got, the more I realized that was just crazy, because I had grown up in the fear, but yet known that nobody was ever coming after us. I mean, we're obviously polygamous everywhere and everywhere I went, and nobody was coming after us.
But bigamy is against the law.
Yeah.
But no one ever bothered you.
No, because the other wives are not married legally. And so
Oh.
it was just more or less that we figured after a while they're dropping it and they're not going to do anything about it. Another sad part is the sexual abuse that I was molested as a kid by 5 different men. And when I got older, I realized how many more of my siblings had been molested and all around me.
How did that relate to polygamy?
I think that because there's so many children and not enough care, not enough guidance for every one of those children running around. Also, there's access, a lot of aunts, uncles, everybody trusts everybody. They're all in the family. People come and go in the house. Strangers come and go. Or Uncle so-and-so that you don't know. And I believe that's the main reason, is there's just too many children with not enough one-on-one attention and care.
And now, so you talk about leaving this lifestyle.
That was really difficult to do. It took me 50 years. That's why the name of my book is 50 Years in Polygamy. But I was always leaving. I realized after I left that I was like, why am I doing this? I was a very conforming child. I wanted to please God. I wanted to do what my prophet father wanted me to do. And I just kept complying and believing it. Even if I didn't believe it, it was like, oh, okay, just put it away. Don't ask those questions. Don't think about it. You're going to get to heaven. And like my mom said, you suffer and endure and you get to heaven. And there's your blessings. So it took me a long time. I would say that I was out in my head and heart at least 8 years before I divorced. So I was moving out. I was going back to school. How am I going to support myself? How am I going to feed my kids? How will I make it on the outside?
So you made plans.
I made some plans and tried to figure out how to do that.
And then you did it.
And did that.
And did
yeah,
anybody try to pull you back in?
Well, I got to tell a cute story if there's time.
Okay.
Not really. In the AB, you kind of go. It wasn't easy. You leave everything you ever known and your family, and people do turn their back on you. But one of the fun things is a sister-in-law that was really close to me said, "Kristyn, we're praying for you. We're praying for you." And I said, "Oh, no wonder I'm so happy. I've never been so happy in my life. Keep praying." And so that was awesome.
Have you
That was
remained a
exciting.
religious person?
No, yes and no. I consider myself a spiritual person. Yeah.
Let's go to Kristyn Marie, founded Voices for Dignity to help bring happiness into the lives of survivors of abuse and oppression. How did you get involved in polygamy?
Well, I started out as a convert to the mainstream Mormon church. I joined when I was a teenager. I went on a mission. I got married in the temple. I was the perfect Molly Mormon, and then things did not go as planned. I thought that this, I found myself a single, divorced mother with, I came from Michigan, and there were hardly any LDS people there. So I ended up moving to Utah for a business opportunity. And I went to a singles dance, and I thought, I'm going to find my eternal companion. And at the very first LDS singles dance I went to, I saw someone who looked like the man that I saw in a dream. I mean, previously I'd prayed for Heavenly Father to reveal to me who I would marry. And I literally saw a face that was burned into my mind. And there he was. at this dance. So I thought, that's proof. I was elated because I thought that was a sign from God. That's proof that there really is a God. I really did see this face, and there he was. And then, he represented himself to me as being the new Joseph Smith. Now, I was very devout, by the way, and I was attracted to fundamentalism. I thought that polygamy was all the things that you hear the polygamists say at the rallies. I thought it was more freedom for women. I thought it's just a matter of free choice. I thought I'm not a jealous person. I could live this. And I thought it was a way I could be the best Mormon I could possibly be. So
let me ask you this. You found yourself drawn to that kind of fundamentalism of the LDS Church, and often when people are religious, they particularly if they come to a religion from the outside, they find that people who are practicing the religion aren't practicing it strong enough or hard enough for them.
Right.
It happens in other religions. We see it in Islamic radicalism. We see it in all kinds of fundamentalism. I've heard people say about polygamy in the LDS Church that they believe that even though it's no longer practiced here on the earth, that they still believe, even, I'm not phrasing this well, that they will practice polygamy in the afterlife.
Absolutely. That's what I absolutely believed.
You believed that.
And I thought, in Relief Society, in the women's groups, and in the halls and between women, we would talk about when polygamy was going to come back to the earth. And most people were horrified. Most of the women said, no way. And I was like, I'll do it. I thought I was like drawn to this because it was a more righteous way of being.
So you were drawn to and I'm sorry, I derailed you. You met this man.
Yeah, so I had this, perfect storm of coincidences that I would meet him, and that he just so happened to be a former polygamist, he told me, and he also was, it came out, not immediately, but it came out that he also was bringing forward some scriptures that were prophesied in the Book of Mormon that were going to be coming forward. Okay.
How old were you at this time?
I'm not going to say. I wish I was 12.
It's kind of embarrassing is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, you would think, but here's the issue.
Yeah.
He's still doing it today, and people with degrees are falling for it. And
Can you tell us his name?
I don't want to tell you his name because I don't want to give him any internet traffic, and he thrives on when people visit his website. He humiliates past victims. He's still deceiving people today. He even deceived a descendant of Hiram Smith, who was the former director of BYU Women's Research. So this is not a matter of do you have a brain. This is a matter of he is a master manipulator.
So you ended up marrying this man?
Yeah, I thought I did. He said he represented to me that the mainstream church knew what he was doing, and he was, the one mighty and strong. That's do you know what that means? Right,
yeah.
That he was the one, and, my family was not in the church, and, I talked to my friends about these things, and I was trying to test it all and do my due diligence, but...
How many people told you not to do this, Kristyn?
Actually, no one.
Can I say something real quick? One of the things that fundamentalist mentality is that to live every single doctrine and every single law, and you're going to be tested and tested and tested and tested. And part of that was that part of the Book of Mormon that's been lost would be brought to the last days. And that's prophecy.
That was not unique to me.
It's not unique at all.
Yeah.
It's part of
I understand that. I'm
system.
not.
And so for us to buy into it and keep doing it, people go, why don't you just get out? A lot of it really is our conviction to stay faithful, to stay doing what we said, be tested, tested, tested.
It's difficult. It is difficult for non-believer. I grew up in the LDS Church, but it's difficult for a cynic and a non-believer
Yeah.
like me to
Absolutely.
to understand. It's difficult.
Right, but you want to know something? You would be vulnerable to something else. I was vulnerable to this because religion was my life. I wanted to serve God with every fiber of my being. I read the Book of Mormon 32 times. I wrote a book called Turn Your Little Ones into Book of Mormon Whiz Kids. You know, I was into my faith.
true.
And the things that he was teaching me, he showed precedence in church history. So it wasn't like I just blindly followed him, right? It was one little step at a time. And when I talked to other people about it, I would only talk about like one principle. Is this true? If it was something I didn't know. I thought I was a smart woman then. You know, I later changed my mind. But you know,
you are. You did your due diligence down to the letter.
I did, and he told me even that David B. Haight was overseeing the work. So in the beginning, he played right on my beliefs. He knew how devout I was. So he made sure that it seemed as if the church was overseeing this. I even called David B. Haight's office to see if it was true. And I didn't get an answer.
Was
but
he a general authority?
yeah, he's a Mormon leader.
Yeah.
And
So where did you end up?
where I ended up was I was believing that I was a first wife that had been called to be the wife of the prophet, and that, and then he had a revelation that he was taking another wife. She would be the legal wife. Like, in other words, she was going to be the new first wife, and I ended up being what I consider the slave wife. My calling was to, earn money for them in any means, and I lost, I lost everything. How I ended up is I lost everything. I lost my dreams.
How long were you in this relationship?
Less than a year.
Sorry?
Just a second. It was less than a year, but what I went through during that year was so traumatic that I couldn't understand how this man who his front presentation was Christ-like. He was always talking about helping the poor and needy. He knew the scriptures like the back of his hand. And he was charming, and I saw him in a dream, and then all these other coincidences would happen that I thought that those were all signs from God. And yet, during this year, I lost my possessions, my heirlooms, my money. He even tried to tell me that God demanded that I give up my children for adoption. Because unless I was willing to give up my children in this life, I would not be worthy of eternal motherhood in the next life. But instead of doing that, I changed the custody schedule with my ex-husband. And I told him that I had done it, and I thought, I'm going to test him back. And if he's a real prophet, he's going to know I didn't obey that. But for 1 week, until I thought of that solution, for 1 week, if you think that a man speaks for God, and you think God is really real, and he's speaking for him, and you're stuck, he tells you, this is your only path to eternal happiness, and your children will be guaranteed. You can't, to me, it was the only option, because by that time, all of my critical thinking had been shut off. So in the end, what happened is, he had these accomplices that were helping to deceive me. They were like, they had miracles they were telling me, these fake miracles. They had, these tests, and
How long have you been away from it?
16 years. 15, 16 years. So one of the accomplices came clean. He came clean. He came to me and said, because he knew I was suicidal by that time. Every single hour, all I could think about was, why should I live another hour? I cannot handle this kind of anguish. And there's a lot going on that I'm not saying, okay? It's very dark. I don't need to say it. But this bodyguard accomplice saved my life and told me he's a fraud. None of the believers are actually believers. They were all ex-Mormon atheists, and they were using me as entertainment. They were benefiting themselves financially, and I mean, here I nearly killed myself many times, and it was just a big, cruel hoax. And that, so it was not technically polygamy like everybody thinks. I thought I had a sister wife, and and she didn't even believe. I wasn't even really spiritually married. He didn't really have the priesthood.
Well, I think you owe it to other people to expose him by telling people who he is and where he is.
Well, everybody says that, but he's very litigious. And the person who would take the fall for that would be me. But I've spoken the truth, and you can figure out who he is on your own.
You can find out. Yeah.
Yeah, and one final thing. Authorities here know who he is. They could have done something about it many, many times. He's exposed on the internet, but they don't do anything.
Brenda, let's get your story.
Okay. I was actually born in California, and my parents converted to the FLDS from the mainstream Mormon church when I was about a year old and moved here. So that's all I ever knew.
That's the fundamentalist church.
Yeah.
And they moved to Salt Lake?
Yes, they moved to Salt Lake.
And who was the leader of the church at that time?
That was Leroy Johnson.
Okay.
So that's how I grew up, and like you mentioned, these groups are very tight-knit, and a lot of them are however many generations in. And so for us as converts, we had no relatives within the church, and everybody did with their cousins and whoever, and we just didn't know anybody. So we were actually quite isolated while we were growing up, and tormented a lot by our neighborhood, the neighborhood kids, they called us pligs and everything. But
So your parents converted to the church, and then did your father marry another woman after that, or?
in the FLDS, it's all very arranged. You don't get to choose, and the prophet decides when and if you marry more women. And so he actually didn't get another wife until after I was married. He does have 3 wives now. And between
He's still in the church?
he still believes, but he's been sent away to repent. Most of the men have, or a lot of them have. As far as I know, between the 3 women, they've had 23 children, if they haven't had any since I left. And it's just like these ladies said, I believed, and it was all I knew, and I was so determined to be a good saint and qualify and be worthy. And I've had some people tell me that I don't really know what it's like to live polygamy because my husband never had more than 1 wife. But the reality is, as a girl growing up in a polygamous situation, it affects every aspect of your life, your entire life. All of your hopes and your dreams and the things that you would imagine girls might think about or want, those are all controlled, and you can't choose who you marry. And I don't think there's very many girls that if they could choose would want to marry a man that's old enough to be their father or their grandfather.
So you grew up here did you go to the Alta Academy in Sandy?
I did.
And so you knew Rulon and then Warren Jeffs?
I actually have a diploma that has a Book of Mormon on it, and it's signed by Rulon and Warren Jeffs. The school wouldn't accept it, though. The college wouldn't. I tried to tell him. I said, it's signed by 2 men that spoke for God. They said I graduated, but they wouldn't accept it.
I can't imagine that they wouldn't accept that.
I know, it's shocking.
So you went to the Alta Academy, and Warren Warren became the principal of that.
Yeah, he always was.
He was the principal, like right when he got out of high school or something. He became the principal of Alta
Yeah.
Academy. And then, did you move down to
Yes.
the Short Creek area when?
All of the people, there was a group of people that lived here just around wherever in the valley, and we were all told that there'd been a revelation that everybody had to move to Short Creek by around the end of the year 2001. And the reason was that the Olympics were coming, and the filth and wickedness that was coming with it, God was going to destroy the Salt Lake Valley. It hasn't happened yet, but so we all moved down.
It didn't happen, I don't think. No.
No.
So everybody left.
Yeah.
All the FLDS pretty much, and you and your family. Were
Yeah.
you married by that time?
Yes, I was married. I had 3 kids by then.
And you were married to a man that was chosen for you?
Yeah, pretty much. My story's a little bit unique, but that's a long story. But yeah.
You were married to a man that was chosen for you, but you kind of liked him?
Yeah.
Well,
It worked
that's
out
good.
really well.
That's
Really well.
good.
It was good.
Yeah,
That happened once in a while.
yeah.
Yeah, not very often. But
So you moved down to Short Creek to Hilldale?
we were on the Colorado City side, and that was one thing when they directed that everybody had to move. I never liked Short Creek, and I never wanted to move there. But then when it became that this is where we have to move, and at first I thought, I don't really want to. And then they told us that it wasn't just about that you could decide, you had to be, by revelation, the Lord had to say you were worthy. And all of a sudden it changes your perspective. You hoped you're going to be worthy
Right.
to be allowed to move down, not be left
Right.
behind.
Now so you were a city girl. You didn't want, is that the reason you didn't want to move down there?
To a degree, I mean, none of the houses were finished, and they didn't have grass, and they didn't have sidewalks. And
I mean, I haven't been down there, but I've seen pictures of it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful area with those cliffs and
yeah,
the desert down there. It's beautiful, but
it actually is.
yeah. And did you like living down there once you got there?
Not really. The people there were a lot different than what we were used to. We were all kind of hand-raised by Warren Jeffs, so we were really strict, followed all of his rules. The people down there were a little bit more free. They'd been allowed more entertainment and more freedom, and to a degree, it was like we moved down there with these people weren't very righteous. And
The people down there weren't very righteous.
yeah. And they didn't like Warren Jeffs very much at all.
Really?
Because they had a more free lifestyle, and when he moved in, he started, putting all the rules that we had lived with our whole lives on all of the people, and the rules started getting a lot more strict. So we lived down there. I can't remember how long. We moved to Las Vegas for about 5 years when they moved the company that my husband worked for, a church company.
A church company.
Yeah.
Which one did he work for?
He worked for Western Precision. They changed it to New Era when they moved it to Las Vegas, and they've now since moved it back to Short Creek.
A lot of people don't realize, but the FLDS church in particular, still, even though Warren is in prison, they have a lot of money, don't they?
They have. I think that they have kicked out so many of the men and boys, and they have destroyed a lot of their own businesses. They used to have a lot of stores and stuff down there that they shut down because they couldn't keep apostates or Gentiles from shopping there, so they would just shut it down.
Well, they have certain businesses there, like there's a lighting company
Yeah.
that's done all of the lighting, does all of the lighting in Las Vegas that makes millions of dollars, and
Yes, they have some very profitable businesses.
very profitable companies that are
Yeah.
still run by the FLDS
Yes.
church.
Yeah.
So you're out of the FLDS church now.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, I had a lot of the same experiences that these ladies, or like that Kristyn did. I wanted to believe, and I felt like I believed. But all of your life, you have that fear in the back of your mind. And,
Yeah.
there's the list of people you're like, oh, I sure hope I don't get told to marry that guy, because that would just be horrible. And not having any choices. And so even though I felt like I was really faithful, I think all along I had doubts. I thought I was happy. And it wasn't until after I had left the church that I actually understood what it felt like to be happy.
Right.
And I was like, this is what it feels like to be happy. Everybody should try this.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Did you leave on? I'm kind of under the impression that you didn't leave of your own accord, though.
We did. At the end of the year of 2011, during that year, they had talked a lot about the United Order, and that was where everybody, it's an early Mormon idea. Everybody,
Right.
there's a lot more communal living. Everybody gave everything to the church, and then you'd get what you needed back from the storehouse.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, hopefully. You didn't, when it came right down to it. But that was something you couldn't just be part of that either. You had to be judged and found whether you were worthy or unworthy. And they had told us that by midnight on December 31st of 2011, if you weren't found worthy, you were no longer even a member of the church. And so any of the ordinances, anything that was tied to the church were then, in an instant, they were null and void. You were no longer married. You were no longer, your baptism didn't matter. And our family finally got called to be judged on December 31st. And the result of it was that they called, and 3 of our children they had found worthy, and the rest of us, they didn't tell you weren't worthy, but if they didn't tell you you were worthy, you knew that you just weren't. And that was really hard because then those 3 had to go and get special ordinances. They got told all kinds of stuff that they weren't allowed to tell us. They had special meetings.
How old were your kids?
At the time, our daughter was 18, and then the 2 boys that were in were 16 and 8.
And so they were taken, and they said there were special ordinances that they were found worthy, but they can't tell you anything about it, and you and your husband not worthy.
Yeah. And so they had meetings at 11 o'clock for the people who weren't worthy, and then a separate meeting in the afternoon for the people who were. But it started to cause a lot of...
How did your kids feel about that? Particularly, the 18-year-old has got to...
I think for her, it was almost a little bit of a, oh my word, I'm worthy. I'm a really good person. And it started to affect... Like I would ask them to do a job around the house. Oh, we can't do that. We have these jobs, the church. I have to do this reading.
So it really divided the family.
It was really dividing the
rather
family.
Rather than your 18-year-old daughter saying, "This is bullshit." Mm-hmm. Rather than your daughter saying that, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
It's, well, I'm better than you, Mom.
And I started to feel like that was the attitude she was taking to a degree, but how could she really help it? With what they had to be involved with. Yeah. So the day that she went and got her ordinances, they got their ordinances done. The next day was Sunday. And so before I sent her off to church, I talked to her and I said, now, I'm guessing that last night they told you that you can't tell me anything that you hear in the meetings. And she says, yeah, that's true. And I said, they probably told you have to keep sacred things secret. And she says, yeah, how did you know? And I was like, well, I know how this works. I says, but what I want you to do is, and this time I still really, really believed in it all. And so I told her, I want you to go and keep an eye on your brothers, which later I found out she couldn't do because they split. All the men and boys sat in the front of the rooms and all the women and girls sat in the back. But I told her that because a lot of the men there, I did not trust them at all, the ones that were found worthy. So I told her, if anyone ever asks you or tells you you're supposed to do something that you don't feel comfortable with, that you just don't feel is right, then you need to come and tell me. And she says, I can't. And I said, yes, you can, because they only said to keep sacred things secret, and if you don't feel comfortable, that means it's not sacred, and so the rules don't apply.
Very good.
And so after a couple of months, one day they went to meeting and they came home, the 3 of them, and I knew my children really well. But the 3 of them came home and they just sat there. They wouldn't eat their dinner. I could tell something was bothering them, but they wouldn't tell me. So I finally convinced my daughter to tell me what I said, something's obviously wrong, what's going on? And so she finally told me that they had announced in meeting that the Lord had decreed that people who were worthy could no longer live with people who were unworthy. And they were going to start splitting the families apart. She says, so I guess we're not going to be able to live with you guys anymore. And at the time, I didn't say it to her, but I was thinking, oh, hell no. I'm not going to give up my kids. And by that point, by the end of the year, because there was such a huge separation, everybody had been decided which side they were on.
This is going on in other families, I would assume. Yeah.
The next Sunday, when I went to our meeting, then they announced it in the meeting that I was in, and it was just... By that point, I knew that I wasn't going to give my children up. And so, even though it was hard to listen to, if I had thought that I was going to have to comply with it, I don't know if I could have even survived the meeting.
Right.
But Lyle Jeffs gets up and he says, this is what the Lord said, all you men that are worthy, not one penny of your money or your belongings can go towards the support of someone who's not worthy. So you need to find jobs for your wives and your children so that they can earn enough money for their own keep. He says, and then we've got to start making this separation. He says, and it's going to be like the biggest game of fruit basket upset ever. And then he just chuckled, and I thought, what a filthy, horrible person. He's talking about taking children from their parents.
It's genius. You know it's genius.
Oh.
It's evil genius.
Right.
It really
Yeah.
is. It's you think, you sit there and you think, well, what's to be gained by doing that? Well, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant to keep people faithful,
Yeah.
to keep people so enslaved to,
Yeah.
and so,
You'll do anything to not have your children taken
Yeah.
away
That's
or to
right.
get them back. And he says, we need to do this quickly, but we need to do it efficiently because we've got to get the flow of money going again. And I thought, it's all about money.
Yeah.
He doesn't care. And in the back of the room that I was in, I could hear all these women back there just sobbing and crying because they knew that they were about to have their children taken. And so my husband and I started very carefully, and you have to be careful until you know for sure how the other person feels, because if he was still feeling really faithful, or if I was, and one of us said something, you could go report, and next thing you know, you're gone, and they take your family away. But we decided that we weren't going to stay, and at that point, we actually thought that Warren Jeffs, we knew him, he was a really good guy. We thought, he must not know, he's in prison, he doesn't know what these other men are doing to his people.
Right.
And so
you're-
we're going to get away.
You're still thinking Warren is a good guy.
We were. We knew him from high school and everything. We thought he's a good guy. And so we thought we had to get away from town so that I was really concerned that my father was just going to come gather up my children and take them because he was quite high up in the church at that point. And then we honestly thought, we're going to get out and somebody's going to call us up and they're going to say, you passed the test. Those guys really are wrong and you get to come over to, the happier, better place. Only then we got out and found out the truth, and it was it's just like it floors you. You feel completely betrayed. Everything you've given your life to was a lie. Mm-hmm. You understand that these people knew what they were doing and they didn't care.
Right.
And they're taking people's children away knowing that it has nothing to do with God.
Right.
And it's like the entire foundation you built your life on just crumbles at your feet. And when we left, we knew that our family would no longer talk to us.
Yeah.
We would be vilified.
Your father's still down there and your mother is still down there.
Like I said, my father...
Did you have any trouble getting your kids to go?
No.
No,
They didn't like it there. They were bullied quite a bit. The area where we were living, the children that lived around us weren't very nice to them.
So
and they just wanted out.
By the way, we're going to run out of time here, and I know you guys will probably have questions. Yeah? So why don't you start lining up at the microphone if you have questions, all right? So you've been away from there for how long?
4 years.
How are you adjusting to life outside of there? Is things going okay?
Yeah.
Yeah?
At first, it was really hard. We lived down in southern Utah for the first year and a half, and so you shop at all the same stores that your family does, and you really miss everybody, but you'd see somebody at the store and they would see you and get this look of terror and run and hide behind a display or whatever.
Yeah.
And it hurt because you missed your family, and at the same time you understand, you don't feel bad towards them because that was what I was doing, a few months before that.
I want to ask each one of you women, we'll let this gentleman ask a question, but be thinking of this. A lot of people say that polygamy among consenting adults should be legal. I want your thoughts on that, each one of you. I got a comment earlier today when I was talking about this during my radio show, said, "Oh, great, Bill Allred's going to do a show about, how evil polygamy is and not have an opposing view." And I'd like anybody out there who thinks polygamy should be legal to please come up and talk about that. Right now, it's decriminalized in Utah. There had been a bill that before the legislature to make it a crime, and they left it decriminalized, I believe, this session of the legislature. But sir, come on up, ask a question. What's your name?
My name is Andrew. I just want to thank all the ladies up here for being so strong and being so forthcoming about everything. But my question had to deal with the abuse that, everybody that is involved in polygamy and is so prevalent, especially leading back to Joseph Smith starting out, all of the secrecy leading to abuse. How do you think that we can stop that from happening? How do we let the public know about everything that is happening and the true nature of polygamy and the abuse and secrecy that, it propagates? What are your thoughts on that?
Who would like to go? It became particularly prevalent all the stuff that came out about Warren Jeffs, and the son of a bitch is in prison for it now,
Right.
as he should be. There is a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that it wasn't that the abuse became prevalent, it just became better known. I think that's, to a great degree, inherent to polygamy. That's just the way it is. Just
Right.
all the believers are going to tell you, no, that's not how it is, but if they were even honest with themselves, they would have to admit that it is.
And you alluded to it, you saw it
Yes,
happening, it happened to you.
Absolutely. It's been, as far as I can remember back, me, my siblings, all over everywhere. When I thought I was the only one, because that's what victims do. They think you're the only person. And then I found out it was everywhere. And studying and research, everything I get my hands on. One of the best books is called A Cruel Arithmetic by Craig Jones. And it talks about in Canada why they decided to keep polygamy illegal there. And it will remain forever illegal in Canada, which is one of the most liberal countries in the whole world. And they said, let's go ahead and look at this. Well, when they spent a whole year in court, a whole year listening to both sides, plus all the research, anybody who wanted to speak pro-polygamy, con-polygamy, anything. And when they were all said and done, the Chief Justice Bowman spent a whole nother year going over all those papers and stacks and everybody's comments and witnesses, and decided polygamy is inherently harmful to men, women, children, and to society.
But there is a big polygamous community up there.
That was
Well,
part
they're
of why
starting
they
to
looked at
prosecute for
that.
polygamy,
That's what
though,
they're
now.
trying to do is
Yeah.
prosecute.
You have a comment about
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
in 2005, Canada legalized gay marriage. They're very liberal. In 2011, they reviewed prostitution. Women are no longer criminalized for selling their bodies. They use the very progressive Nordic model for their laws. But so a progressive country like that said, well, it's consenting adults. Let's look into polygamy. But the fact is that just the women in polygamy have shorter life expectancies. They have more psychiatric problems, more health problems. There's more infant mortality. There's less education, more poverty, more child abuse, and it's rampant. And so even though there are examples, lots of examples of families that have absolutely no abuse, the fact is that this is a system that we shouldn't be legalizing because it's patriarchal. It's the women and children that really, really suffer. Well, and the boys.
Yeah,
Let's,
they do.
Yeah.
let's get to another question
Yeah.
here quickly. What's your name, sir?
My name is Brian Brown.
Okay, Brian.
This question, I'm assuming all three of you believe in God. If not, that's fine. But you had these prophets, these so-called prophets, as God's mouthpiece, and the atrocities that they basically dealt on you. Did any of you go through a period of time where you might have hated God because you thought that's what God was doing to you?
Yes.
Of course.
Maybe you could expand on that?
I went through that when I left, well, before I was leaving, when I was discovering that I had been lied to, that everything I believed was not based on fact and true. And I mean, I started reading everything I could get my hands on, finally, because that was what I could do. You weren't supposed to be for that. And I was finding, that's a lie. That didn't happen. I didn't have to be a polygamist. And I felt abused by all that, that the cover-ups
Yeah.
and everything. And why didn't God tell me? I was faithful. I did everything I was told. Why didn't God get me out of that? And so I went way over here. It's like, I don't want to hear prayer. I don't want to hear the word God. I don't want to hear faith. And then move back into where I'm comfortable with my relationship with God. And it took a while, but it was like, what? I did everything I thought I did everything God wanted me to do. But that's what I was told, indoctrinated, believed with all my heart, because that's what from the time I was born.
Kristyn, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember thinking, my entire worldview, I didn't really know how the world worked. Even though I came from the mainstream church, there are many things. I mean, everything was falling apart. And I was in mourning over, do I even believe in Christ anymore? And I remember thinking, well, if there is anything to believe at all, I have to say, I do respect the born-again Christians' concept of grace, because the born-again Christians used to always pester me and tell me how evil I was, and I just couldn't stand them. But then when I, subjected myself to obeying a prophet, I thought, that's, whenever you have a man talking for God, it's just absurd, and, it's, it's dangerous, so.
Brenda, any comment? Did you go back to some sort of faith, or did you?
No.
No.
I kind of feel like I've had enough religion to last several lifetimes.
Yeah.
And
Did you
Me
lose a
too.
belief in God, even?
I lost, I don't know if I'd call it lost, I changed my view. Because I had people, I'd say, but I prayed with all my heart and soul for years. And I was suffering, and this was horrible. And where was God? Why didn't he give me a sign or something? And they said, well, you were praying to the wrong God. And I was like,
Right.
He couldn't hear me?
Yeah.
Could he
Well,
not?
Right.
Right. And so, as far as whether there is a God or not, I don't know, but I don't feel like he's as involved in our lives
Agreed.
as people want to think
Agreed.
he is. I don't ask him to find my keys.
Right.
Yes. Step up. What's your name and what's your question?
My name's
What?
Priscilla.
You'll have to pull that down and go ahead.
My name's Priscilla, and I'm just wondering, what made you guys believe that you could make it on the outside after everything that they told you? And what helped keep you going?
Did you catch that? What
Yeah.
made you believe you could make it on the outside, and what keeps you going?
Well, my case is different since I started sort of on the outside. But by the time I was done, I had no self-esteem. I had I had to figure out how to do critical thinking. And so just surviving at all was hard. It was very, very difficult. And little by little, especially there was all this victim blaming. Like, you believed it. You believed it. You did it to yourself. You deserved it. So there wasn't a lot of help. But I'm going to let these two answer because they have a better inside-outside perspective.
It was really difficult for me to leave because I knew my family was going to stay, and they weren't going to be very happy about me leaving. And so it wasn't an easy process, even though they didn't try to lock me in and everything. I remember a lot of grieving, but the biggest thing that in helping other victims with the coalition and things that we do is that I hear the same thing I went through, which is, well, I'm suffering, I'm in hell, I might as well join the rest and be in hell. So when we leave, a lot of us I felt that way for years. It's like, I'm in hell here. Why would I want to live this in eternity? And I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore. But then I realized, just like Brenda said, that the more I was out and the more friends I made, all of my friends and family and sisters are closer to me than my family ever was, ever. I mean, this is genuine relationships. And by the way, I have lots of friends, and they aren't sleeping with my husband. I love that. I mean, you don't have to be sister wives to have friends.
Right, we're friends.
Yeah.
We don't sleep with
And the kids that we help, they all have lots of moms that aren't married to the same man. And this is the best part. And I'm going to get emotional here, but I've never been so happy. And that's what I want for others. I want them to see this joy and happiness that we have. It took a long time. You know, it was daily and process and going to school and going through a lot, lives of hell and then heaven. But we create that ourselves, and it's the best life I've ever had. Everywhere I go, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at the mountains, look at the flowers, look at those people.
I know.
It's like, and here I was 50, and I didn't see that from these eyes, from this head.
Absolutely.
And so it's incredible. It's incredible.
For me, I think I reached a point where I thought I couldn't imagine a worse hell than what I was already living in. And I thought, how much worse could it be? And when we first left, you kind of have this overwhelming feeling of you're now responsible for everything. You can't just, instead of having somebody tell you where to work and where to live and what to do and what to think, now you were making choices that you had to be responsible for. You couldn't just blame it on somebody else. But I think that's also what kept me going, is I thought, I can choose. I can decide, and I can actually choose to be successful and give my children a better life than they ever were going to have. And so, after the initial feeling that you're just going to sink into the ground because everything you ever believed was a lie, you start rebuilding your life and going, okay, well, all that was a lie, so what do I want now? What do I want to believe? What do I want my children to learn? And you realize it's like this clean slate that you can build an entire life on of your own choice.
Yeah.
Let me just posit this, and then we'll have to wrap it up here. We can talk about outlawing polygamy, making it against the law, but in particular in some of these groups and sects, and I think of the FLDS in particular, if you outlaw it, and we see this what has happened when they raided the Yearning for Zion compound down in Texas. They raid the compound because they think that all of these children are being abused, and they probably are. And so they raid the compound. They arrest Warren Jeffs. They send him to prison. They raid the compound. They take all of these children into protective custody. But then what do they do with them?
Yeah.
The children cry and cry and cry and cry because they're not with their mothers.
Yeah, but guess what they're doing now?
So they take them all back.
They weren't with their mothers anyway.
Yeah,
No,
do you
they
realize
weren't.
that?
A lot of them
A
weren't.
lot of
That
it's
when the
misconceptions
they-
about what really
But
happened.
they just take them all back.
It's.
What do they do with them? Should they put them all in?
They did they sent these children back, and then the parents turned them right back and gave them back to Warren again, back into compounds. Right now, we want to know where those 420,
35, I think.
children are.
They
because
moved them.
Where
They moved them
they
somewhere.
that's
They
just
moved them.
it. They
They're in-
moved them. They weren't with their parents anyway. Warren had taken them away. I have to, Bill, I hope it's okay, but
Yeah,
I hate to call it a raid because it was an attempted rescue. They went in hoping to rescue one girl they really believed with all their heart was being abused. They went in attempting to rescue her, and because they worried about what was in there, the guns they'd been told, then they did have the armor and the people going in. They did it very gently. They went in very carefully. I was there. I went out to Texas. I was looking for my sister. So I know a lot of the research and a lot of the background. They went in very carefully, a little at a time. I stayed for the court, every one of the court sessions after that. These children, most of them, my sister had been hauled out there to take care of a group of preteens who were going to be married off, and she was in charge of 9 to 11-year-olds who were getting marriage education. And that was her group. And Warren had these people in dorms. They'd been taken from their own mothers. In fact, even
but what do
Warren's
they do with them?
wives. He took his children from their
You mean-
wives to be raised
Do you mean what
by
should
other-
they have done with them?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
but that's the problem.
Yeah,
What
it
do the
is.
authorities do with
Well,
them?
the
Right.
authorities should have kept them in foster care. I mean, or at the very least, you have to think of them as missing children. There were families who had
Now
their
they're
children
gone.
ripped away from them. These families love their children as much as you love your children. You have to imagine that this is you. Your children are missing. They're in this raid somewhere. I mean, they're in this compound, and the authorities, I think, pressured by this PR campaign, give the children back, ended up giving the missing
I
children
should have brought this up earlier. We're
Back-
out of time.
This is
back
intense.
to their abusers.
This one's
So they're
intense.
gone. Sorry.
It is
I-
intense. Because children are what we advocate for.
You asked a question.
Yeah.
You said, is this a matter of consenting adults? No, it's not. This
Right.
is if it were only consenting adults, it would be fine. I mean, it would be like
Yeah.
if you can't have
Right.
children anymore. But this involves children and how
That's it.
how the children are harmed. And we have children in houses of hiding. We have young boys that are being trafficked. We have girls being trafficked. This is religion that is being used as a tool for human trafficking. And that is not to say that every family is miserable. There is happiness. We have to admit this.
Sure.
There's happiness in there too in some certain situations.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I want to thank Kristyn Decker, Kristen Marie, Brenda Nicholson. Also, special thanks to Lindsay Hansen Park. The program produced by Dylan Allred and Corey O'Brien. Thank you to Andy Holson, everyone here at 50 West. Our technical staff, Dave Peterson, Trent Anderson, and Matteo Coletti. If you want to know more about the subject of next month's show, you should like us on Facebook, follow us at Think Utah on Twitter, visit us, thinkutah.org. I'm Bill Allred. Thank you all for coming. Good night.